I always thought I had a pretty good marriage. Richard and I had been together for 3 years, and while it wasn't perfect, I figured we had the normal ups and downs that every couple faces. But looking back now, I realize I was ignoring the red flags that were staring me right in the face. The thing is, Richard wasn't a bad guy. He never raised his hand to me, never called me names, never did anything that would make me think I was in an abusive relationship. But there was something that bothered me, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. It was the way he changed when his family was around. Like he became a different person entirely. His father, Paul, was what you'd call old school. And by old school, I mean he believed that men ran the house and women existed to serve them. His mother, Carol, had been playing the silent, submissive wife for so long that I'm not sure she even remembered having her own opinions. Richard's brother Mark was basically a carbon copy of their father, loud, opinionated, and absolutely convinced that women should know their place and stay in it. Mark's wife, Anna, was this sweet, gentle woman who always looked like she was walking on eggshells. She had this nervous energy about her, like she was constantly waiting for someone to tell her to shut up or disappear. It broke my heart to watch her, but I told myself it wasn't my business. After all, as long as Richard wasn't like them, what did it matter? God, I was so naive. I grew up in a completely different household. My parents raised me to believe that respect goes both ways in a relationship. That marriage is supposed to be a partnership between equals. That a woman's job isn't to serve a man like some kind of unpaid domestic servant. So while I knew Richard's family had some seriously outdated ideas about gender roles, I convinced myself that as long as my husband wasn't footsteps, I could deal with their occasional comments and eye rolls. I was about to learn just how wrong I was. It was a perfectly ordinary Saturday evening. No holiday, no special occasion, just a simple family dinner at our house. I had spent the entire day in the kitchen, not because anyone demanded it of me, but because I genuinely loved to cook. There's something deeply satisfying about creating a meal that brings people together, about making a house feel warm and welcoming. And honestly, I wanted to impress them. I wanted Richard's family to see that he had chosen well. I went all out that night. Roasted chicken with herbs and garlic, creamy mashed potatoes, collard greens cooked with bacon, homemade cornbread that was still warm from the oven. I plated everything beautifully, set the table with our good dishes, even lit a few candles to create atmosphere. Standing back and looking at what I had created, I felt genuinely proud. Everything looked and smelled absolutely perfect. When the family arrived, there were the usual pleasantries and small talk. Paul made some comment about how Richard had really lucked out with me, which was his not minus stolp way of saying good job finding a wife who cooks and cleans without complaining. I smiled and nodded, playing the gracious hostess. I was used to his backwards compliments by now. We all gathered around the dining room table, and I began bringing out the plates one by one. I served Paul first, then Carol, then Mark, then Anna. Finally, I set my own plate down in front of my chair and was just about to sit down when something happened that I will never, ever forget. I felt a hand reach across me. Paul, my father minus and minus law, took my plate. He literally reached over, picked up my dinner, and passed it down the table to Mark. "You eat after the men," he said, like he was commenting on the weather. I froze. I actually laughed out loud because I was so shocked, so certain that this had to be some kind of joke. I mean, who says something like that in 2025? But as I looked around the table, the reality of the situation hit me like a slap in the face. Mark was already digging into my food like nothing unusual had happened. Carol was staring down at her own plate, silent as always. Anna looked deeply uncomfortable but kept her eyes down, clearly too afraid to say anything. And Richard, my own husband, the man who had promised to love and honor me, just gave me this look. It wasn't a look of shame or disbelief or anger at his father's outrageous behavior. No, it was a look that said, "Don't make a scene." And then, in a voice so quiet I almost didn't hear him, he said those two words that changed everything between us. "It's tradition." Something inside me broke in that moment. Not just broke, it shattered into a million pieces. I wasn't raised to be anyone's afterthought. I wasn't brought up to sit quietly in my own home and wait for permission to eat like some kind of servant. But I also knew that if I exploded right then and there, if I started screaming and throwing things like I wanted to, they would just dismiss me as an hysterical woman having an emotional breakdown. So instead, I did something far more powerful. I did nothing. I sat there, perfectly still as they ate the meal I had spent hours preparing. I didn't reach for another plate. I didn't touch any of the food. I just sat there and watched, letting my anger build and simmer and transform into something much more dangerous than rage. I watched Richard laugh at something Mark said, like we were having a perfectly normal family dinner. I watched Paul take second helpings of my cornbread. I watched Carol lead in that same mechanical way she had probably been eating for decades, trained into submission. And I started planning. The next morning, I woke up early and sent out a group text to the whole family. Dinner at our place again next Sunday. My treat. Richard looked at me with surprise. Another dinner? Are you sure? You seemed pretty quiet last night. I smiled sweetly at him. I just want to make sure your family knows how much I appreciate them. For the entire week, I planned and prepared. I was going to cook the meal of a lifetime. Prime rib with a perfect herb crust, garlic butter shrimp that would melt in your mouth, scalloped potatoes rich with cream and cheese, homemade bread that would put any restaurant to shame, roasted asparagus with lemon and parmesan. This was going to be the kind of meal people remember for the rest of their lives. By the time Sunday evening arrived, our house smelled like heaven. The aroma of roasted garlic and fresh herbs filled every room. The table was set even more beautifully than the week before. Everything was perfectly timed, perfectly prepared, absolutely flawless. The family arrived right on schedule, and I could see their faces light up when they walked in. The men sat down first, just like they had the previous week. They reached for their forks, ready to dive into what was clearly going to be an incredible meal. And that's when I struck. I stood up calmly, walked around the table, and took their plates right out from under them. One by one, Paul's plate, Mark's plate, Richard's plate. Then I handed those plates to the women, Carol, Anna, and myself. You eat after the women, I said, keeping my voice exactly as calm and matter-minus of Minnie's fact as Paul's had been the week before. The silence was immediate and absolute. You could have heard a pin drop. Paul's jaw tightened, his face turning red with anger and disbelief. Mark's coughed and shook his head like I was being completely ridiculous. Richard just blinked at me in shock. Babe, what are you doing? Richard asked. I picked up my fork and took a slow, deliberate bite of the prime rib. It was absolutely perfect. It's tradition, I said. Paul pushed back from the table so hard his chair scraped against the floor. We don't do things like this. I chewed thoughtfully, swallowed, and smiled. Exactly. Mark was getting redder in the face by the second. This is stupid. I tilted my head at him. Oh? It wasn't stupid last week. And that's when something beautiful happened. Anna, sweet, quiet, always made us nervous Anna, let out the smallest snort of laughter. She quickly covered it with a cough, but I caught it. And I could tell that for the first time in probably years, she was really looking at her husband. Really seeing him for what he was. Carol, bless her heart, picked up her fork before Paul for the first time in her entire marriage. She still looked nervous, her hands trembling slightly, but she did it. And I took my sweet time eating every single bite, savoring not just the incredible food, but the look of complete powerlessness on the men's faces. When I finished my plate, I leaned back in my chair, wiped my mouth with my napkin, and said, since the women cooked, the men can do the dishes. The look on Paul's face was absolutely priceless. Mark actually laughed because he thought I was joking. But when I didn't start clearing plates like the obedient little housewife they expected me to be, he realized I was deadly serious. Richard hesitated, looking back and forth between me and his father. Then he sighed, stood up, and started collecting plates. And just like that, the entire balance of power in that family shifted. After everyone left that night, Richard and I sat in the kitchen. The sink was still full of dishes he had washed. He was quiet, staring into his drink like it held the answers to all of life questions. What the hell was that? He finally asked. I raised an eyebrow. Dinner? He let out a humorless laugh. You humiliated my dad. Did I asked? Or did I just show him what it feels like to be on the other side? Richard set his drink down harder than necessary. You made everyone uncomfortable. I shrugged. Good. His jaw clenched. I don't understand why you had to make it a whole thing. And that's when I completely lost it. I slammed my hand on the counter so hard it's tongue. Oh, so it was fine when your dad did it to me, but when I do the exact same thing, suddenly it's a problem? That's just how he is, Richard said, weakly. No, I cut him off. That's just how you let him be. That's how your mom lets him be. That's how your brother treats Anna. And I guarantee you that's exactly how he's raising his sons to treat their future wives. Richard actually flinched at that, and I could see I had hit a nerve. I softened my voice but not my resolve. I'm not some submissive housewife, Richard. I am your wife. Your partner. Your equal. And if you think I'm going to sit there and wait my turn like I'm less than you have another thing coming. He exhaled through his nose, rubbing his temples. You're making this bigger than it needs to be. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. No, I'm finally making it as big as it needs to be. The next morning, my phone was buzzing before I was fully awake. It was Anna. Are you awake? Her text read. Yeah. What's up? I replied. Can we talk? I glanced over at Richard, who was still sleeping, then slipped out of bed and went downstairs to call her. She answered immediately. I just wanted to say thank you. I frowned. For what? For standing up to them, she said, her voice quiet and shaky. For showing me that I'm not crazy for thinking this isn't normal. My heart broke for her. Anna, how bad is it? She let out a shaky breath. I don't know. I mean, Mark's never hit me or anything, but he talks to me like I'm a child. He tells me what to wear, what to cook, who I can and can't see. If I ever try to push back, he tells me I'm being emotional or hysterical and that I need to calm down. And his dad backs him up every single time. My hands curled into fists. I had suspected it was bad, but hearing it confirmed made me sick to my stomach. And last night, she continued, her voice even softer. When you flipped the script, I watched Mark's face. He was furious. But not because he thought it was unfair. He was angry because for the first time, he wasn't in control. Anna, I said carefully, what do you want to do? Silence. Then, barely above a whisper, I don't know. You don't have to decide anything right now, I told her. But you do deserve better. Just know that, okay? Okay. I could hear the tears in her voice, but also something else. Something that sounded like hope. 2 days later, I was at work when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Paul's name, and I stared at it for a long moment before answering. Hello? Silence. Then a slow inhale. You think you're clever, don't you? I leaned back in my chair. Paul, if this is about the dinner. This is about my son, he interrupted. You embarrassed him in front of his family. You put ideas in his wife's head. You've been poisoning him against us since the day you married him. I almost laughed. Poisoning him? By expecting to be treated like a person? Don't play dumb, Paul spat. I know you're kind. Women like you don't want equality. You want control. You want to turn my boy into some weak, spineless excuse for a man. I raised him better than that. I took a slow breath, then said calmly, well, Paul, if you're so convinced your son is weak, maybe you should ask yourself who raised him that way. Silence. Then a low, menacing chuckle. You think you've won something here. But let me tell you something, sweetheart. A woman who fights her husband's family doesn't stay married for long. And then he hung up. I sat there staring at my phone, my heart pounding. Not because I was absolutely furious. Paul had just made a critical mistake. He thought he was threatening me, but what he had actually done was show me exactly what kind of man he really was. And now I knew I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for Anna, for Carol, for every woman in that family who had ever been forced to wait their turn. Over the next week, I watched Richard change. At first, he was walking on eggshells around me, clearly not wanting another confrontation. But then I started noticing other things. He would leave the room whenever I was on the phone with Anna. He started defending his father more aggressively. He just comes from a different time, he muttered one night as we were getting ready for bed. You can't change people like him overnight. I stared at him. And you think you should stay that way? Richard sighed. I think you could have handled it differently. I scoffed. Like how? By smiling and nodding while he treats me like an unpaid maid? You don't get it, he snapped, his voice suddenly sharp. That's just how things work in my family. I felt something cold and ugly twist in my gut. Is it? Because I don't remember agreeing to be part of a family where I'm treated like a second bulk citizen. Richard groaned, rubbing his temples. God, you always do this. You always have to turn everything into a fight. I actually laughed at that. Me? I turned things into a fight? I turned off the bedside lamp and lay down with my back to him. And for the first time since we got married, I wondered if I had completely misjudged the man lying next to me. 2 days later, Anna called again. But this time, she wasn't crying. She was absolutely furious. I can't do it anymore, she whispered into the phone. I can't keep living like this. I sat up straight. Anna, what happened? He found the pamphlets, she said, her voice shaking with anger rather than fear. What pamphlets? She took a shaky breath. I went to see a lawyer. Just to ask questions, just to see what my options were. But Mark must have gone through my purse. He found them last night. My stomach dropped. Oh shit. What did he do? He freaked out. Started yelling about how I was humiliating him, how I was trying to ruin our family. He grabbed my phone, told me I wasn't leaving him. Ever. My blood ran cold. Did he hurt you? Silence. Then, in the softest voice, she said, not yet. That was all I needed to hear. Anna, listen to me. You need to leave. Tonight. I know, she whispered. But I don't know where to go. You come here, I said immediately. Pack a bag, take your car, and get out before he comes home. She hesitated. But what if? I don't care, I cut her off. You are not staying in that house one more night. 3 hours later, Anna was standing in my doorway with a suitcase, her hands shaking and her eyes red from crying. I pulled her into a hug. You're safe now, I whispered. But even as I said it, I knew this was far from over. Because Mark wasn't the type of man to just let his wife walk away. And Paul certainly wasn't going to let this challenge to his authority go unanswered. I was right. That night, as Anna and I were getting ready for bed, her phone started ringing. Mark's name lit up the screen. I snatched the phone from her hand and silenced it. A second later, Richard's phone started ringing from the bedroom. We froze, listening to the muffled conversation. Then we heard voices outside. Real voices right in our driveway. I peeked through the blinds and felt ice crawl up my spine. Mark was standing there, and he wasn't alone. Paul was with him. They knew exactly where Anna was. And they weren't leaving without a fight. Mark and Paul stood in our driveway like they owned the place, clearly planning to intimidate Anna into coming home. Anna was shaking beside me, and I could see her resolve starting to crumble. If I don't go out there, he'll just keep coming, she whispered. That's when Richard walked into the room, still holding his ringing phone. He took one look at Anna, then at me, and his face twisted with realization. You knew? He said, his voice low and accusatory. I didn't answer, because what was I supposed to say? That I had helped his brother's wife escape an increasingly dangerous situation? That I had done what any decent human being would do? He scoffed, shaking his head. Jesus Christ. You went behind my back. You didn't even tell me. I clenched my jaw. Because I knew you'd try to stop me. Richard's nostrils flared. Mark is my brother. You don't think I should have had a say in this? Your brother is scaring his wife so badly that she had to run in the middle of the night, I snapped. Do you really think I give a damn about how that makes you feel? He didn't respond because we both knew the answer to that question. Another knock came at the door, harder this time. Anna, Mark's voice came through, eerily calm. Come outside, babe. Let's talk. Anna shrank back, shaking her head frantically. Paul was next. You're embarrassing yourself, girl. And you're embarrassing our family. You don't just walk out of a marriage. I felt a fresh wave of rage rise up in my chest. I turned to Richard. Are you going to let them do this? Right here in our house? Richard looked torn, conflicted. Then, without a word, he went to the door and opened it. Mark and Paul stepped inside like they owned the place. Anna flinched as Mark walked toward her. You're being crazy, he said, his voice deceptively soft. Come home. Let's talk like adults. But I saw the way his fingers twitched. The way his eyes kept darting to Paul for approval. He wasn't here to talk. He was here to drag her back by force if necessary. Anna shook her head. No. Mark's face hardened immediately. No? Her voice wavered, but she didn't back down. I'm not coming back with you. Mark turned to Richard, clearly expecting backup. Tell her she's being ridiculous. Richard didn't say anything. I could see the internal war playing out on his face. Paul took over, turning his glare on me. You did this. I crossed my arms. Damn right I did. His eyes darkened. You think you're ruining this family? I let out a cold laugh. No, Paul. I'm just exposing what's already broken. He stepped closer, trying to use his size to intimidate me. But I didn't move an inch. You have no idea what you started, he said, his voice low and menacing. And that's when I completely lost it. I looked him dead in the eye and said, I started nothing. You did? The day you taught your sons that their wives were beneath them. The day you told your daughter Minus in Minas Law that she had no right to leave. The day you raised your son to think control was the same as love. Paul's jaw clenched, his fists tightening at his sides. For a moment, I thought he might actually hit me. And then Anna spoke. I'm filing for divorce. The words dropped like a bomb in the room. Mark turned to her, completely stunned. You don't mean that. Her lips weren't trembling, but her voice was steady. I do. Paul stepped forward, his voice dangerously low. No woman in this family gets divorced. Anna lifted her chin, and for the first time since I'd known her, she looked truly strong. Then I guess I'm not part of this family anymore. Just like that, the entire power structure that Paul had built over decades began to crumble. He couldn't believe it. His control, his legacy, everything he had worked to maintain was slipping through his fingers. Mark looked like he had been punched in the gut. And Richard looked like he was realizing for the first time that maybe, just maybe, his father wasn't the man he thought he was. Then Paul did something that shocked everyone in the room. He turned to Richard and said, "Get in the car." Richard blinked. What? Paul's face was red with fury. I will not let this woman poison you any further. We are leaving. No. My stomach turned to ice. Paul wasn't just trying to control Anna. He was trying to take Richard away from me, to drag him back into the fold where he could be properly controlled. And Richard hesitated. For one terrifying moment, I saw it in his eyes. The pull of years of conditioning. The desperate need to be a good son. The fear of disappointing his father. I thought, oh God, he's going to go with them. But then Richard straightened his shoulders and said, I'm not leaving. Paul's face froze in disbelief. Mark looked just as shocked as I felt. You heard me, Dad. And not going anywhere. Paul's eyes burned into his son. Don't be stupid, boy. You walk away from us and you're done. No coming back. Richard took a slow breath. Then he looked at me and said, I'm staying with my wife. Paul stormed out without another word. Mark was too stunned to say anything coherent. He just gave Anna one last look, full of anger and betrayal, before following his father. The door slammed behind them, and suddenly it was quiet. Anna was crying, but for the first time, I didn't think it was from fear. I turned to Richard. Are you okay? I asked. He let out a deep, shuddering breath. I don't know. And I understood. He had lost something that night. A father, a brother, an entire way of life. But maybe, just maybe, he had gained something too. Anna filed for divorce the next week. She moved into her own apartment, got a job, started therapy. And for the first time in years, she smiled without looking over her shoulder. Carol, in a move that shocked everyone, left Paul. She packed a bag one night and disappeared. When she finally reached out, it was from a small apartment 3 towns over. She was starting over at 60 years old. And Richard struggled. There were nights when he almost called his dad, when the weight of breaking free from years of conditioning nearly crushed him. But he chose me. He chose us. One night, months later, he sat beside me on the couch and whispered, I see it now. I didn't ask what he meant, because I already knew. This wasn't just my victory. It was ours. All of ours. And finally we were free.